Um, Thank you very much for inviting me to the SuperSummit. I will now share my screen and let you know about my most recent paper that is called Identity Through the Lens of Translocational Positionality. Now, give me a second. All right. Okay, this is irrelevant. This is as well. Let me just open this one here. And there it is. Come on. Work for me once, not the other way around. All right. Good. Let's start. So, give me a second. I will readjust my screen. Oh my, it doesn't quite work. Oh, okay. Oh, all right. There we go. So, let's talk about identity through the lens of translocational positionality. This is a paper that I've recently handed in on the 15th of August for my master's degree in German and Spanish. And my professor was Dr. Nida Fagani Arani. So I will try and show you how it works. Okay, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Oh my. Oh no. Please bear with me. Usually this tends to work, but in this case, it seems that my computer is not reacting. I am incredibly sorry. Oh my. Come on.
Left or right on your keyboard?
Sorry?
Click left or right on your keyboard.
I am.
Or maybe with your mouse, if you click, it's going to work.
Yes, now it works. Perfect. All right. So, what was the scientific aim of this paper? It was meant to illustrate the interwoven dynamics of the intersectional framework of translocational positionality. I will explain in a second what that means. However, I would like to readjust the video where I can see you, Mrs. Parks, because I cannot see the full presentation. There we go. Okay, so the research design was the following. It was meant to illustrate the hermeneutical approach of the lived experience of one single female university educated teacher with a migratory and refugee background on the basis of 2 narrative interviews. In this case, I was approached by a young, I was approached by a young university educated woman. She has an Afghani refugee background. And I found her story incredibly interesting. We had to lead a few narrative interviews with regards to experiences of otherness. So in this case, we just asked her, in a team of 3 other people, so we were 4 in a group, to just recount 2 anecdotes where she had recently felt an experience of otherness. So the keywords of this paper are the following: identity, belonging, translocational positionality, intersectionality, the lived experience, and the narrative interview. All right. So the theoretical framework was the following. I would like to quote Mead. In this case, he was cited by Antheus in her paper that was published in 2018. Society is unity in diversity. What does that exactly mean? I thought about it, and then I came up with the following phrase. What constitutes society if not the multiplication and thus amplification of the innermost characteristics of the self? And then I looked into what it actually means to have an identity. According to current research, definitional attempts of the concept of identity and belonging as well are manifold and often contradictory within themselves. In this case, Antheus proposes a new framework, which is called translocational positionality. It is meant to encompass all of the intersectional markers of an identity, which means in some cases we are advantaged in our position of the social fabric. In other cases, we are not. And what does that mean? How does that constitute an identity? Yeah, okay, so let's keep going. As you can see in this case, and this was very interesting to me as well, because I studied it in the semester beforehand, this is the so-called 30 million word gap. This will be relevant later, but I wanted to include it because social economic standing is the most relevant factor in how easily somebody, especially a child, can acquire any language, not just a foreign language, but their own as well. As you can see here, the professional, the children of professionals, that is to say, teachers, professors, psychologists, whatever the case, have the vastest vocabulary, while children of working class parents and parents who receive welfare are much further below. So the chasm is quite big. All right, let's keep going. You can see this, by the way, in Hart and Risley in 1995. I've also quoted them in my bibliography if you want to check. All right. So what was the applied methodology? There were two narrative interviews. The first one served as a base. So we just asked her, tell us two anecdotes where you felt that you were considered the other. Yes. And then a few weeks later, after analyzing the first interview, we led a second interview. Both interviews were about 12 minutes long, but she had a lot to say. So we used the second interview for further clarification because we were just not quite sure what she had meant. I mean, we had some hypotheses, but of course, those were our own thoughts and not hers. And because of these two narrative interviews, the other ones had different hypotheses, but I had three hypotheses about the intersectional dimensions of this framework that I'm using, which is to say the social status of this individual, her ethnic background, and her religious affiliation. I was wondering how do I say this best? How her social status impacts her. Is she privileged within her community? Is she disadvantaged outside of her community? What is the case? Then her ethnic background as an Afghan woman. Does she receive any privileges inside her work? Or does she not receive any? My hypothesis was that because of the monocultural collegiate, she would encounter some problems. But at the same time, she works at a school with a multi-religious and multicultural student body. So it was two things at once. She may have been disadvantaged within her collegiate, but then advantaged within her student body. Then the third hypothesis was that according to her religious affiliation, which is Muslim, she would maybe be denied certain privileges by her monocultural Christian or non-religious collegiate, while at the same time being awarded certain advantages and privileges within her multicultural and multi-religious student body. All right, let's keep going. So the discussion. I'm almost done. As you can see, it was a very short paper, but it was very interesting and actually very lucrative, if I may say so, because I found out quite a few things. So according to her social status, there is a definitive advantage within her community. She called it her bubble. She was the first the first female to receive a university education within her family and within her extended community. So she was definitely advantaged. That's a definitive yes. Now the ethnic background. I thought I was going to be right, but I wasn't. There was a definitive advantage within her place of work because she told me she used to play a game with her kids, which is to say she let them guess where she came from. And nobody knew. They all guessed something different. And then when she revealed that she was actually an Afghani refugee, they were all incredibly shocked because there is this imposed position that only Austrian people, only Austrian women and men are allowed to pursue higher education. But that, of course, is not the case. Keep in mind that these children are 11 years old, right? So where does this come from? Where does this thought process come from? It must come from somewhere. But then when she revealed her identity, they were incredibly pleased, and they said, "Oh, we thought we weren't allowed to visit university, that this is only the case for Austrians." But this is not the case. She told them, "Look, if I can do it, you certainly can. You can do anything you set your mind to," right? And it was sort of, in her words, I'm just paraphrasing here, it was like a mutual rediscovery of self-esteem. And she hoped that students who voiced their struggles with language learning to persevere just as she did, because due to her family background, it was not possible for her to receive any additional education. So she had to learn everything. She had to acquire the language. She had to acquire the content of basically anything in the classroom, not outside of it. Yeah, others had other possibilities. She did not. So the religious affiliation, it was an isolated case. I'm going to tell you about that. It was an imposed disadvantage within her collegiate because at some point a colleague had seen her, I think it was her Facebook profile picture, and at this point she was already the class teacher of her own class, I might add. So she saw her profile picture of a woman in a hijab. The thing is, she thought that that was her profile picture. It was not. It was a screenshot of a movie that she liked, because, as it turns out, the interviewee does not wear a hijab. So the next day, She referred to the interviewee as the one with the veil, which in Austrian German is quite harsh, right? In English, of course, it sounds very soft. In German, it is not. And then in her further encounter, in her second encounter with the colleague, she said, why didn't you use any other identity markers? For example, the colleague with the black hair or the class teacher of class X. And then she said, well, I just didn't remember your name. So I found that very interesting. Good. What is the conclusion that we can draw from this? Preliminarily, of course, because further research needs to be done in this case. So the perceived presence of shared characteristics facilitates equal or better standing with each new encountered group, whereas the perceived absence of shared characteristics leads to a negation of the individual's positioning in the newly encountered group. I have already done quite some research in this area. In my bachelor's, during the bachelor's degree, right? For my bachelor's paper with Mr. Kevin Perna, it was supposed to be about the allocation of power and recognition within the Austrian dialect. And I came to the same conclusion back then, but that was a few years ago. So I thought, that's interesting. So my hypothesis that I thought might have been not so well researched have actually been confirmed, because as it turns out, language is the cornerstone of all communication. So of course, if we do not speak the same language, if somebody else thinks that you do not speak my language, therefore I exclude you, yeah? It's where was I? Then of course there are going to be problems in communication, right? And yeah, so hypothesis from 5 years ago confirmed. But of course, in this area, we need much more research. Of course, there's already some discourse about whose language has capital, whose culture has capital, and even whose religion has capital. I have added all of these very interesting papers and very interesting articles to my bibliography if you want to read that. But the discourse goes back into the, I think, 19th century. So it's not quite a modern idea, but it has received a new spin. All right. So let me show you my bibliography just for a second. It's longer than the actual presentation, but I thought I should be thorough. Here you go. Right. So you can read all of that later on, and I can also send you my paper if you want to read it. Just let me know, right? So this is all highly relevant and quite recent. And I've quoted two professors that I admire a lot, Mrs. Inchidirim, and I think, I must have forgotten Neda. Let me see. I think I didn't put her in, but she's the brain behind this operation, just to let you know. And yes, well, I think that was it. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention.